Welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. Today, I'm quite happy to admit that making assumptions can come back to bite you. I bypassed Mike as a guest some time ago because he was a man working with women trying to decide to divorce or not to divorce. However, Mike has a truckload of experience in personal development, and then he figured out a system. He explains it all so well, and probably to make sure my doubting side was following, he asked a number of times if it made sense. Are you ready for this? I said some variation of yes and absolutely 14 times, as well as explaining his system really well. Mike talks about the brain. And if your brain appreciates visuals, there's a visual of his demo brain at the bottom of his page at Boom with a Bang. Mike offers great analogies and great anecdotes to help make it clear. Full disclosure, Mike works with women trying to make a decision around divorce, but his system will work on any major life decision you might need to deal with. Listen now. Divorce. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's avoided, and sometimes you are just so confused. It's a subject I usually avoid because I am divorced, but that doesn't mean I'm a proponent. Each situation has its own set of circumstances, and many of those circumstances are known only to the two people involved. When I first saw today's guest's profile, I clicked away. He wrote a book called Divorce Decision Decoded, with explainer notes if you're a woman considering divorce and want to get unstuck from the daily painful status quo and finally move forward with your life with inner peace, this is the book for you. See my dilemma? He wrote a book for women considering divorce. But then his face appeared on my suggested guest's page a second time. He says he has a process which suggests to me gender and the final decision maybe aren't givens. I am well aware that a large percentage of midlife divorces are initiated by women. I am also well aware that so much heart and heartache can also accompany the decision that I decided it was time to talk to Mike. Mike Fink, welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Agnes. I'm glad. I was not aware of all those back and forth, so I'm so happy I'm here.
Yeah, I am too. But let's jump right in. You're a man. How can you help women with their divorce decision?
That's the question I get quite often. So it kind of starts with the origin story. How did I come to even help people make those kinds of decisions? So there's a saying that your wounds are your gift. And the process I'm going to share with your listeners today, and women especially, is the result of 2 decades of expertise in the field of personal development and 5 years of misery. So I'm going to share a little bit of how I came to this, my own struggles and suffering with indecision and quote unquote divorce indecision, because you'll get to see that the pain of indecision is quite gender neutral. And then I explain how I ended up working with women. But basically, in my 2 decades of experience in the field of personal development, the second one, I ended up getting together in a 50-50 business partnership. And the first 5 years of that partnership were fine, but after 5 years, we needed to make some changes in the way we wanted to operate, in the way we would serve our customers. And this is when it became very clear that our values were conflicting. And we had a very different vision in terms of how we wanted to serve people, where we wanted to go, what we wanted to achieve. And the friction became worse and worse. It was escalating to the point that we're having screaming matches, and we're screaming in front of our top level employees, which I felt ashamed after that, I will confess. But the thing that became really obvious at some point, even though it took some hindsight, was that the real problem I was facing wasn't the bad business relationship. It was the indecision about what to do about it. Do I stay or do I go? Is it me? Is it him? Is it the relationship? Is he right? Am I wrong? Well, what if I'm right, but it still means that I need to pull the plug, and then I will need probably to sell an asset to buy him out, and what if I cannot make it by myself? And as you can see, those are considerations that are very common also in people who are considering divorce. And the fact is that if I had not lived the pain of divorce for myself, I would have not understood how debilitating it could be. Because it's such a big decision. I'm going to talk about that also in terms of our biology and the brain, that you are stuck in the status quo trying to find the best possible decision. But because our brain craves closure, it keeps going. And since there's no obvious answer, it's always in the back of your mind. And it affects your mental focus. It affects your sleep, your energy level, your emotions. You are anxious, you are stressed, you are depressed. It affects your ability to work, your self-esteem. I thought I was, I'm a smart guy. I should know how to figure things out. I'm a smart person. And yet I was like stuck in trapped. It affects your social relationships, your motivations to go out, your health habits, your eating habits, your mental health, your physical health. And in the case of women considering divorce, I hear this all the time, it affects even their relationship with their kids because they are not able to be fully present and engaged because it's always in the back of their mind, or they have to put a smile on the outside when they're dying on the inside. So I went through this tremendous pain. I burned out. I mean, I had real physical effects. It was really to an extreme level. And then, thankfully, I would say, I hit my 50th birthday. And that's when I did a life review. And when I looked at all the big decisions I made in my life, I realized that I got most of them right, except for a couple of them. And one of them was having gotten into this business relationship. And the reason I had gotten the other decisions right was because I had applied a process that had developed over time. And for some strange reason, I did not apply to this super important decision of getting in business. So when I finally realized that, I decided to apply my own medicine. And when I did, Agnes, I went from being anxious, lost, confused, stressed, burned out to now I know the answer. I had this alignment, this clarity. My head was aligned with my heart, was aligned with my gut. Not only did I know what to do, which was to end the relationship, but I felt at peace with that decision. It made sense on a logical level, but also on an emotional level, and also on an intuitive level. And right away, everybody saw that I was transformed. Now, it doesn't mean it wasn't easy. I had to sell an asset to get the money to buy him out. I had to negotiate the terms. There were still a lot of challenges, but the way I felt inside enabled me to move forward and make the right decisions and figure things out one step at a time. And after that, the universe kind of operates in funny ways sometimes. My spouse's brother came up and he was a medical student. He had been studying for like 16 years, just a tremendous amount of time. And he needed to make some very important decisions regarding his future and his career. And he has spent the previous 2 years agonizing. What should I do, this or that? He did Excel spreadsheets. He couldn't sleep at night. He had just nausea only by thinking about what he should do. So I said, you know what? I have my process and I have actually improved upon it. Let me take you through it. And I took him in 2 hours from confusion, anxiety to clarity and certainty. And we just knew what his path forward was. And he's been thriving ever since. So all this to say that at that moment, something happened, which was I completely shifted my life mission. I told myself, I have found something really important, a new process I want to share with the world. And the most logical or natural fit was for me to help people make the divorce decision because I kind of went through my own divorce, even though it was a business divorce. And also it's one of the most difficult decisions a human being can make. Now, why with women and not with men, you may think. And the reason is twofold. Number one, 69% of divorces are actually initiated by women. And number two, in my experience, at least in the United States or North America, most women are more open to seeking help regarding those kind of aspects rather than men who are maybe more emotionally guarded or secluded. So I ended up, even though I started working, and I also work with a few men, but I ended up really helping women and having talked to hundreds of them, really understanding the specific challenges of that decision. So that's how it came to be. My wounds became my gift, and this is now my life mission. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And I feel so much better realizing that, like, even just statistics come into it, and also human nature, which you generalize to a certain extent, but it's a truism. So yeah, just that men are sort of more emotionally guarded, as you said. So,
Indeed, indeed. So, if I may, I'm eager to share the process. Obviously, I can share only the big, the 30,000
yeah,
feet view and the big blocks, but at least it will give, if nothing else, hope because I find that there are many women who are considering divorce and who are just stuck in indecision and anxiety for years, sometimes even decades. My longest, my quote unquote record was with a woman who had been stuck for 32 years almost the entire marriage in indecision. And why? Because they're simply terrified or afraid of making a mistake they will regret. So I have developed this process. I get them to clarity and certainty in terms of what to do about their marriage in 30 days or less so that they can finally experience inner peace and move toward a happier life that they deserve to live. So you may think, wow, that's fast, right? But how does it work? And the first thing that people need to realize is that they are stuck in a status quo for a reason. Most people, most women think that they are in a way at liberty to make that decision, that they're thinking about it. But the reality is that they are not free to make it. I know it sounds shocking, but I'm going to explain. The reality is that the divorce decision is such a high cost of failure decision, meaning that if you get it wrong, the consequences are so potentially devastating that there is a part of our brain, and right now I'm holding a mock-up of our brain, and for the people who are listening to this podcast, just imagine your brain like an ice cream cone that has 3 scoops of ice cream, one on top of the other. And the first scoop is the one at the bottom of our brain. It's the primal brain. It's the old brain, the reptilian brain. Have you heard this term before, Agnes? Okay.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm going to get back to it in a moment because it's quite important. Just to complete the other scoops of the brain, of the ice cream cone, the second scoop on top of it is the emotional brain. And the last one is the rational brain, the neocortex. I'm going to get back to that. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because our primal brain, our reptilian brain, our old brain has one job, which is to protect you, to keep you safe. It's our survival instinct. And if you think about divorce, it's a very complex decision because you have a lot of variables to consider. But as I said, it's high cost of failure. But why? Well, first of all, it affects not only you, but also usually other people. Your kids, your spouse, obviously, but maybe your family, your friends. It affects you, but on many fronts: emotional, psychological, financial, professional, social. It affects you for most likely years to come or even for the rest of your life. And it's pretty much irreversible. I mean, technically speaking, yes, you could divorce and get married again, but once you make that decision, it's done, and you don't have the benefit of trial and error. So the consequences are so big that the primal brain, the part in charge of your survival, says, hey, you know what? If you don't have certainty, the status quo is better. When in doubt, wait it out. The devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Because its job is to keep you safe. And it says, my best chance of keeping you safe is by keeping you safe in the short term, because then you are most likely to be safe in the long term. And therefore, it says, even though you may be miserable in your relationship, at least this is the known, that's the devil you know. I'd rather keep you there because we know that you have survived it. Even though there are a lot of consequences related to the pain of indecision. But that's what the primal brain thinks, and that's why it keeps most women stuck for years or decades in the status quo. Does that make sense so far, Agnes?
It does absolutely, but watching your brain that our listeners can't see, that part of the brain is quite small compared to like that rational scoop. And so it's interesting that it has so much control.
Yes, and that's a wonderful comment and very, very acute, in fact. And I'll talk about that in a moment when I talk about the best way to communicate with all the parts of your brain. So if this part of the brain, even though it's small, it's very, very powerful. I mean, have you heard about the fight or flight response?
Yes.
Well, there is a third response, which is the freeze response, which in this case is exactly what happens. It's like, when in doubt, freeze, because at least we know that, you have survived this. So the reality though is that you may think, well, but how do you get past that? And the answer is certainty. And even though a lot of women are stuck in indecision and the status quo and they don't know what to do, there are some women that you may know or may have heard of that have divorced, and it was just a simple decision for them, and they were done, and that was it, and they were able to move forward. Have you heard about those people?
I'm not sure if I've heard of them, but I did have a few questions instantly come to mind.
Yes, what are those questions?
Well, just whether or not they their primal brain perhaps isn't working as well. So it just became, like we can dispense with that response, and just sort of go off and get my divorce, so to speak.
That's an interesting interpretation. I'll give you a different take on that. The
Okay.
reason those women were able to make a decision, make it easily, and go right away is because the primal brain actually agreed with a logical decision. And what happens in most cases is that something that I call an instant deal breaker happened in the relationship.
Okay.
And it's very subjective. There's no universal answer of what a deal breaker is. For some women, it may be simply be the fact that, my husband cheated on me. Or maybe it's something that is different, like, oh, they stole the money for the college fund for our kids and they lost it gambling at the casino. I mean, I'm going extreme examples here, or maybe they did drugs, but it is something that happened that was so unacceptable that for the woman, not only logically she says, I'm better off divorcing, but the primal brain agrees because you know what? That behavior is so unacceptable, so dangerous that you're probably safer moving on and divorcing than staying in this kind of extreme situation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you
Okay.
for explaining that.
So certainty really is the answer to that. And again, it's human nature to be stuck in indecision because as long as you don't make a decision, technically speaking, you're off the hook. But when you make a decision, let's say the decision to divorce, even though it doesn't have necessarily to be that one with the process of developed, but as soon as you make that decision, you expose yourself to the consequences of being wrong, which means that maybe your kids will blame you. Maybe you will blame yourself. Maybe you'll have a sense of guilt. Maybe your friends will blame you, your spouse will. To all the possible negative consequences. Also because, in general, it's true in life, but it is even more so in the case of divorce, things generally get worse before they get better, right? It's like if you want to renovate a bathroom, the first thing you need to do is tear down the bathroom. There will be a lot of dust and debris, right? That's the first step if you want to then rebuild it to make it more beautiful, so it gets worse. So that's why people get stuck. And the illusion of I need to think about it, in a way, is a rationalization of I'm staying safe here. And maybe they have this hope that things could improve, but it's not the case. So the primal brain keeps you stuck. The way out of being stuck is certainty. How do you get certainty if there is no instant deal breaker? And this is what I have come up with and why the process that I have developed is so effective, because it will provide not only certainty on a logical level, not only for the third scoop of the brain, but also to the other scoops. And I'm going to expand upon that in a moment. So how do you do this? The first step is what I call value mapping. It simply means gathering all the pieces of the puzzle, meaning all the things that are important to you in your ideal spouse / ideal relationship. And, if you think about a jigsaw puzzle, if you try to solve 1,000 pieces jigsaw puzzle when you have only 200 pieces in your hand, how likely are you going to be to solve it? Right?
Sorry, I have a 1,000-piece puzzle sitting in the next room.
Right, but you need all of them in order to see what it's supposed to represent and to understand the picture on the puzzle. And this is the fact is that most people do not consider all the variables. I remember this client, her name was Felicia, and her husband had cheated on her more than once. He had gone to sex addiction support groups supposedly to get better, And in spite of that, he had cheated on her again, and she was devastated. But he was such an amazing dad. And all she could think about was, I can't do this. I cannot do this anymore. He cheated on me, but he's such an amazing dad. Bing bong, back and forth between those two things. But the reality is that the relationship, has many more variables than just a few. And that's the mistake that people make. So when I talk about variables, it means the things, the values, the things that are important to you in your relationship. And when you start writing them down, they start actually adding up. So for example, Agnes, maybe you want a person who is physically affectionate, maybe somebody who has a great sense of humor, or who likes to travel, or somebody who's a good provider. I mean, if you start listing down the things that you value in your spouse or your ideal partner, they add up. It's not a trick question, but if you were to make a guess, how many things do you think, how long is the list in terms of the number of values for most people when they think about their ideal spouse or partner? How many things do they value in their ideal spouse or partner?
I would 10.
That's a good guess. And the reality is that it's usually between 20 to 30 things that are important. Yeah. If you take the time to dig, and that's thing number one, you have to take the time to dig within yourself to understand what are your needs. What is it that is important to you? What are the things that make you feel good?
I obviously haven't made a list.
And you know what? Most people, it's the rare exception who has done that list.
Yeah.
So again, nobody teaches you that. I mean, we're not taught in school about how to make important decisions, how to make decisions that are complex, but the brain cannot juggle so many variables at the same time. Now, this is one of the shows that I love because we have time to talk and to share. So let me give you an example of how we make decisions. Have you ever been to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you are not sure what to order? And you keep thinking like, oh, maybe this or maybe that. Has that ever happened to you, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the way it works, and the reason most, or not most, but a lot of people get stuck sometimes ordering food, it's because they have some values that they want to fulfill, some things that they are looking for when they're ordering a meal that they're not necessarily aware of. And for most people, and it's a generalization, but they want something that tastes good, that is healthy, and reasonably priced. Sometimes it can be something different. Maybe they want something that has a large serving because they're hungry, but let's take those first three that I mentioned. And the reality is that if you look at the menu and there is something that is tasty, healthy, and cheap, it's a go, go, go. If you look at the menu and there's nothing that is any of those things, it's a no, no, no. But most of the times people get caught into the yes, but dance. Oh, it's tasty. Yeah, but it's not healthy. Oh, it's healthy. Yeah, but it's kind of expensive. And so on and so on. And at the end of the day, the only way to come to a final decision that will maybe not be ideal, but that will satisfy you is to understand the hierarchy of what's more important versus less important, right? If healthy is more important than tasty, you'll choose a salad, not the burger. If you want something tasty, you'll get the burger. If you want cheap, you'll get the pizza. I mean, I'm generalizing, of course, but just to illustrate. And the thing is that we have trouble making a decision when only 3 variables are involved. Our brain has a working memory and it has a hard time processing just 3 variables. Imagine 20 to 30. That's why people go and spin endlessly between the pros and cons and they keep weighing the pros and cons. Even if they write them down, the brain is not geared to be able to process a lot of variables at once unless you have a structured process. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So step number 1 is to gather all the pieces of the puzzle. Now, I have here 2 Rubik cubes. And for your listeners, just on audio, one Rubik cube has all the colors jumbled, and the other one is perfectly solved. All the colors are aligned. Having said that, Agnes, if you look at the Rubik cube that has all the colors jumbled, are there any color stickers or smaller cubes missing compared to the other cube?
No, I presume not.
All the pieces are there, right?
Right.
What you need to go from the jumbled cube to the solved cube is simply to apply the proper sequence, to take all those pieces and put them in the proper sequence in order to get to a solved cube.
I was watching you. I thought, if you solve this in like 5 seconds.
No, I'm not a Rubik Cube expert. I'm a decision-making expert. But the analogy is good because what I have discovered is that There is actually a specific algorithm that enables you to go from confusion to clarity. In the same way that there's an algorithm that if you apply to the cube will help you always solve the cube every single time. And this is one of the big discoveries that I've made, and that's why I'm so keen to sharing it with the world. So we already have all the elements within us to make the decision. We just don't know how to make sense of them because we don't know in what sequence to put them. So because of that, we need to first gather all the pieces of the puzzle, the pieces of the cube, and then to apply the proper sequence. So what is step number 2? I'm just going to take a sip of water and keep the suspense while I'm waiting.
Yeah, right. And you're doing such a good job that I'm just going to scroll down my notes because you're touching on everything on my list. So
Thank you.
it's
I'm
great.
glad.
This is
And
great.
feel free to jump in and ask me additional questions if I haven't covered it. So step number 2 is what I call categorized ranking. It's bringing order to chaos. It means that once you know all the things that are important to you, going through a very structured step-by-step process to really understand what is more important versus less important. And once you have that perfect ranking, distinguishing between or categorizing between what are the things that are essential to me versus optional. Because this is really, really key. And I'm going to give you an example that may be extreme, but it illustrates the concept I'm going to share in a moment. Let's imagine, Agnes, that you are looking for your dream house and you have 20 things that you are looking to have in this house. And one day, a friend of yours comes to you and says, Agnes, I have found your dream house. It has 19 things out of 20. That's 95% of the things that you're looking for. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
I would hope it's a good thing.
That's the answer that most people provide. And the answer is it depends, because let me give you 2 scenarios. If what is missing is like you wanted some extra storage space and it's missing that storage space, you know what? That probably is optional. You wouldn't care. But what if the one thing missing is that this house, this dream house, is in a different city, province, or state that you live in, right? All of a sudden, everything else becomes a moot point. And that's why I say that values are not an equal vote democracy. They are a military hierarchy. It doesn't matter how many values are fulfilled in your relationship. What matters is which ones are fulfilled. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And this is really important. I'm going to give you actually 2 stories to illustrate how having this distinction is so powerful. The first one is the example of Stacy. And Stacy was not happy in a relationship. She felt that things were not going well. There were a lot of negative emotions. And one thing that would drive Stacy mad was that her husband was messy. He would leave the dirty dishes in the sink for 3 days in the kitchen. He would just come home and just drop all the dirty clothes on the floor without putting them in the laundry basket. It would drive her nuts. And she would nag him to try to be more tidy. And obviously that was a huge point of friction. And then I guided Stacy to identify all the things that were important to her. And it turned out that she had 22 things. But out of those 22, it turned out that having a tidy husband was number 21 out of 22. Not only was optional, but it was like the second to last. And that just was a huge aha moment for her, because she realized that she had been spending so much time, so much energy, so much aggravation on something that was not a needle mover, on something that at the end of the day didn't matter as much as other things. Now, why did this happen? It's because she didn't have clarity in terms of what her values were, in terms of what her needs were, and because she was feeling negative emotions, she had misattributed those emotions to the most obvious things, which is she looked in her environment and she saw the dirty clothes on the floor and the dirty dish on the sink. So it was, I want him to be tidy, and it's always messy, that's why I'm unhappy. The great news is that once she understood what was essential versus optional, it enabled her to focus on only the essential list and then hone in on the real points of leverage. And she was actually able to save their relationship. So this process that I'm sharing, even though it's called the divorce decision decoded, it doesn't mean that it's going to lead to divorce. It means you want to decode or to understand how to make that decision properly. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And as you were speaking, I was wondering if because mess is such a visual
Mm-hmm.
that it would expand. And I guess the other question I have about the first woman whose husband needed some guidance, but he was an excellent father,
Yep.
whether the fact that he was an excellent father, that wouldn't necessarily change if they got divorced because he would still have access to his children. So does it become a different than the list, perhaps? I don't know. I'm not explaining this well.
I think you make very, very subtle and important comments. So you made a very good point. He could still be a good father even though they would not be together, but in her mind, she felt that she may be detracting from the children's experience, well-being, if they would be seeing the family unit broken up and seeing their father separately, right? So this all goes into a different topic is, what about the impact of my decision on my kids? But here is the trade-off that a lot of women have is, all they are caught is in the immediate, like, short-term pain disruption that they fear they may inflict their kids, without realizing also that there may be some long-term cost associated with them staying in the relationship. And there's no one size fits all answer. Really, what this process does is it reveals each person's individual answer based on their own unique values. And one thing to keep in mind is that when you are in a relationship with your spouse, you are actually providing a role model to your children, right? I remember this woman, her name was Alba. She told me that she had known pretty much since the beginning, since the moment she was about to marry her husband, that he was not like the perfect man. But to her, it was normal because she had seen her parents be in an unhappy relationship and fight all the time, and that was accepted. So to her, that's the model of what a normal relationship would look like. And it took her 10 years to realize that she wasn't happy to come and work with me. But it was a real lightning from the sky when one day her kids told her, "Mom, it's funny, you seem happier when Dad's not home." And that's when she realized, oh my goodness, what am I doing to my kids? Because yes, technically speaking, and her husband was a good man. They had everything going on for them. He loved her. It's just that she wasn't happy with him. So it's not a question of blaming he's a monster and he's harming me. No, it's just not necessarily a good fit. So in that case, the only way you can truly answer whether you should divorce or not, and also answer what the impact on the kids may be, is by having clarity on your relationship, which means understanding all the things that are important to you, which ones are essential and optional, not fulfilled, and so on. Because otherwise, you cannot know what you're providing as a role model to your kids. It's like painting on a canvas, and you want to give that paint to your kids, but if you're painting in the dark, you don't know what you're painting. So again, the big thing that you need to do first is get clarity about your relationship first, because it also impacts the decision that you may make regarding the children. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I had this other woman, her name was Kate. And again, to illustrate the importance or the reason why distinguishing between essential and optional is so powerful, is because she had been struggling for 5 years whether to divorce or not. She had been married 25 years. She had kids with her husband, and her husband was not a bad person. And by the way, I'm going to make a quick parenthesis, but I told you that the way out of the status quo is certainty. And I told you that women who have certainty are usually the ones who have an instant deal breaker because something unacceptable happened. And the funny thing is that I have a lot of women that I work with who tell me, you know what? I wish my husband was a jerk. It made some funny, but what they really mean, without maybe realizing, is that he would be such a terrible person that they would have certainty that divorce would be the right move. But since they're not the monsters, since they're nice people, or the relationship is still acceptable, that's when they're stuck in the status quo and the hope and the uncertainty. Okay. So Kate was stuck in the uncertainty. I helped her gather all the pieces. It came up that she had 27 things that were important to her, and out of those, 17 were essential. Actually, sorry, it was 17 essential and 22 total values. And the good news was that out of the 22 things that she was looking for in her ideal partner, her spouse fulfilled all of them acceptably or completely, except for 7. And it comes down to 70% of the things. It was like, wow, you could say that's pretty good. 70% of the things that you're looking for are being fulfilled. But the ones that were not fulfilled, the 7, were all in her essential area. And even worse, 4 values out of her top 5 were not fulfilled. And that's when she told me, wow, this is such a huge eye-opener, because finally she was able to understand why she had been miserable all those years. Because otherwise she was stuck like, he's a nice guy, but why am I so miserable? And when she understood that the 4 out of the 5 things that were most important to her were not fulfilled, plus another 3 that were part of her essentials, then it gave her clarity. And at that point, I guided her to a process to see which changes would be required and to assess whether her husband would be able to make them or not. And she realized that it would not be reasonable for her to expect that her husband would make, 7 changes in his behavior long term, because I use this term, it would almost mean that he needed a personality transplant. Changing 7 things means you become a different person. But when she had that clarity, it gave her the certainty, and she was able to move forward with confidence and peace of mind. Does that make sense?
It does. If I can just ask a question here,
Oh, as many
is
as you wish.
with someone like your last person, Kate, did she ever look at whether he fulfilled all of those on the day they got married?
That's a great
Like,
question.
yeah, do things, I mean, obviously things change throughout
Right.
years and decades of marriage, but you wonder whether, you're basking in the glow of true love or whatever you want to call it. And so you get married and, you have your kids and life goes on, and then suddenly it's like, I'm not liking this person as much as I used to. And is the glow off the rose or whatever they say, or she overlook those things in
No,
the
it's
end?
it's such a great comment. I love it. And you said something earlier. You said that you yourself have not made a list of the things that are important to you in your ideal partner, right?
Right.
And the reality is that most people have not taken the time, not because nobody ever taught us how to make those important decisions. I had to stumble upon it, or it's because I have 2 decades of expertise in the field of personal development. I've spent years thinking about how we make decisions. I mean, it took me a lot of time and effort to come up with that. But otherwise, we're not being taught, we don't know it. So the reality is that most people do not know exactly what is important to them in a relationship, and do not have a process to actually evaluate beforehand. It's actually one of the things that I hear a lot. A lot of women told me, I kind of felt even before getting married that something was off. But again, they were stuck in the status quo of going forward with the marriage because they didn't have clarity, therefore no certainty. And calling off a wedding is a high cost of failure decision if you get it wrong, right? So it was the same phenomenon. But your comment is so great and insightful for another reason, which means, let's say that at the time, the spouse fulfilled most of the values, whether they were aware of it or not. 2 things can happen. One is that your own values change over time, and that's quite possible. I mean, the thing that is important to me in a spouse, at 50 is very different from when I was 20. Or maybe your husband has changed, and even though your values may not have changed, well, he has changed, and therefore there's a mismatch now, right? So the fact is that there could be several reasons why there is a mismatch now between what is important to you and how it's being fulfilled or not by your spouse. But the fact is that as of now, if the things that are most important to you and essential, they're not being fulfilled, it's painful. And the way you feel is the way you feel. And there's no denying that. I always tell my clients, what you feel is what you feel. A person trying to tell you, you shouldn't feel bad because he's not tidy, say, let's take that as an example, unless it really turns out that it's an optional one. But if it's an essential one, it doesn't make sense to tell a person you shouldn't feel bad. You should make an effort and try to get over that. But do you have a favorite kind of food, Agnes? Do you have like a specific thing that you love eating?
Greek salad.
Greek salad, okay. It wouldn't make sense for a person to come and tell you, Agnes, Greek salad, no. You should stop liking Greek salad. Stop. It's like you would look at that person and say, that person has gone mad. Is there a kind of food that you really dislike? What is a dish that you really do not like?
Liver and onions.
Okay, liver and onions. What if somebody were to come and tell you, Agnes, liver and onion, come on, get over it. It's healthy. You should eat it for your health, right? It doesn't make sense. What you feel is what you feel. Then the most important part is understanding if those things are really essential versus optional. And once you understand that, this is when you can make a decision. Does that answer your question or address your comment?
It does, and I find it really curious that so many of us make our pros and cons list about other decisions in our life. But you're right. It never occurred to me when I was out on my own and dating of like, okay, let's make the list. What are the deal breakers? What are the must-haves? So it's sort of interesting, as I say, we do that in other parts of our life with other decisions.
We do, and the reality is that we do that, but just doing pros and cons is not enough, or just understanding what's important in your relationship, it's not enough, because if you don't have a ranking, then you know that those things are important to you, but that's why you keep going back and forth. Should I stay? Should I go? What about this? What about that? Because you don't have the relative order of importance. And as I said, our brain has a very difficult time, creating an order even with 3 variables. Imagine 20 to 30. You need a specific process. This is the part that I guide my clients through, and we go back to the Rubik Cube, It's like there's a specific sequence to apply. You will always get to solving a Rubik Cube, but you need to understand what the sequence is and the algorithm is. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So since we have more time during this podcast, it's great because other podcasts I had like to try to shorten my message because of time constraint. But I talked earlier about instant deal breakers. I'm going to add another piece of information here just to enrich your listeners even more. There's actually another kind of deal breaker that is more subtle to detect, which I called cumulative deal breakers. And the best way to explain that is to go back to the restaurant analogy. So let's say that you go to a restaurant and you love the food, and they have food that is healthy, tasty, and reasonably priced. But one day you go to the bathroom and the bathroom is completely filthy. It's horribly filthy. Well, that could be an instant deal breaker. You say, you know what, I don't care. This, never again. That's it. So that's an example of instant deal breaker. But there's another example of a cumulative deal breaker. Let's say that you go to this restaurant. It has great food. You go there with friends, but there is construction noise because they're renovating the store next door to the restaurant. And you come inside. Now, if the restaurant owner tells you, they're almost done with the construction noise, with the jackhammering and everything, in 5 minutes it will be done, you'll say, okay, you know what, we'll put up with it for 5 minutes, you'll just go in and have your meal. But if he tells they're going to just be jackhammering for the whole day, that's it. Because the cumulative effect of that noise, if it's constant, if it's on the long term, you cannot take it. That's what I call a cumulative deal breaker. And it's much more subtle and harder to detect, but it also is an important thing to be aware of. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Great. So now, by leading my clients through this process, I get them to have what I call logical clarity and certainty, right? They can know what the right decision is. But the reality is that, let's go back to the brain. So, if you try to make a decision just with logic without involving your primal brain, which we saw earlier is the gatekeeper of your decision, and your emotional brain, it's like trying to run a race hopping on one leg, which is your rational brain, instead of using both your legs, which is, rational brain plus emotional and primal brain. I mean, you can not go twice faster when you run with 2 legs. It's exponentially faster, right? So how do you convince your primal brain once you have logical clarity and certainty? And for that, I'm not going to give you the answer myself. I'm going to have you find it for yourself. It's much more fun this way. But I'm going to give you some statistics. The first one is you have to understand that we don't have one brain, we have 3 brains. And our brains were not all developed at the same time. Our primal brain, the first scoop of ice cream at the bottom, was formed about 500 million years ago. The emotional brain was formed about 200 million years ago. And the rational brain, the neocortex, the last scoop of ice cream on top of everything, in charge, mind you, of logic, reasoning, and language, was formed 2 to 3 million years ago. So why am I giving you all this information? Well, it's not so that you can be good at Trivial Pursuit. There's a reason. It means that our primal brain and emotional brains were formed way before we developed language. Now, pay attention to this, Agnes, because there's a profound implication. It means that your primal brain and your emotional brain, which, by the way, are the gatekeeper of your decision, do not understand words. They do not understand language or words. And yet, what do all the traditional solutions, whether it's talk therapy, whether it's marriage counseling, whether it's talking to a lawyer, to your friends, what do all these solutions have in common?
Words.
Words. They're all language based, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so now we know why we're getting stuck, because the primal brain and the emotional brain are not on board, and they cannot be on board just by logic. I have lost count of the women who tell me, my therapist tells me things that I should divorce, but my marriage counselor thinks I should divorce, but. And there could be two reasons for the fact that they're not convinced. Number one, maybe it's based on their values, not on the woman's value, and that may be one thing. But even if they agree logically, as long as they don't have the agreement or the alignment of the primal brain and emotional brain, it's not going to happen. So how do you communicate with this part of the brain? Legitimate question, right? So let me give you or lead you through a thought experiment. Do you have children, Agnes?
Yes, I do.
Okay, may I ask what their age is?
40, 38, and 37.
Wow, you must have been like a
Oh, yeah.
teenager then, right?
No, but I did have 3 kids in 3 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay. Okay, so let's imagine that when one of your children, one of your kids was 12 years old, I would assume that if you were to find out that what your 12-year-old would be bullied and physically abused in school, that you would have been very upset, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I want to do, and I'm going to guide you through this thought experiment, and at the same time I will be guiding your listeners. So imagine that you have a child, and if you don't have kids, just imagine somebody that you truly care for who's being physically abused. And you find out that that person or that your child is being physically abused. And I'm going to give you 4 different scenarios in which you can find out the exact same piece of information. First scenario, the person comes and tells you, you know, Agnes, your child is being physically abused at school, but you don't know what the abuser looks like. You have no clue who they are and what they look like. You would be upset, correct?
Yes.
Well, scenario number 2, a person comes and tells you, Agnes, your child is being physically abused, but this time you know what the abuser looks like. Are you less upset, just as upset, or more upset?
At the risk of blowing this right out of the water, I'd be less upset because now I can go and run him over.
Right, but let's say that you haven't run him over yet, because you would be feeling better when you run them over. But at the moment where you learn that they're being physically abused and you know what the other person looks like, and by the way, I didn't say you know them or you know where they live. I just said you know what they look like. But in the moment where you find that they're being physically abused, are you less upset, just as upset, or more upset?
I guess I'm supposed to be more upset because I can still
You're
keep on
not
thinking
supposed
about
to do
getting.
anything. You're supposed to tell me what you feel. I'm not putting anything in your mouth.
I still think I'd be less upset because it's tangible information, and I can do something with information.
Okay, but what makes it so that you are less upset, it's not that you learn that they're being physically abused, is that you believe that you can do something about it.
Right. I'm no longer as helpless as I was
Right,
before.
but those are 2 separate things. So I want to really separate the fact that how do you feel when you learn that they're being physically abused, not that you can do something about it. Does it make sense? Let me just walk you through scenario number 3. A person comes and they don't tell you anything, but they show you pictures of your child being physically abused by another child. How do you feel? Less
Well, I've
upset.
just reached livid.
Okay, and last scenario, you drive to school to pick up your child from school, and then you get off the car and you actually witness with your own eyes your child being physically abused by another kid. How do you feel? Less upset, equally upset, or more upset?
More.
More, right? Okay.
Yes.
So isn't that interesting? Because if you think about it, It's the exact same piece of information. Your child is being physically abused. What is the difference between those four scenarios?
Information.
Yeah, but how did I present it differently? What was the difference? The first one, somebody was just telling you, but you didn't know what they looked like. Second time, they told you that your child was physically abused, but this time you knew what the abuser would look like. Third time, they showed you pictures. Fourth time, you saw them. What is the difference between scenario number 4 and scenario number 1?
Like scenario 1 is still theoretical.
Yes, because they used words. They said your child is being physically abused, and only this part of your brain, the rational part of your brain, got it, but not the emotional part and the primal brain. Your primal brain, emotional brain feel it only when you see it. The best way to communicate with those parts of your brain is through visual communication, right? That's why, scenario number 1, you just heard about it. Scenario number 2, you knew what the other person looked like, which helped you kind of maybe visualize it more. Scenario number 3, you saw it in images. Number 4, you actually saw it in person. And this also kind of answers the question that maybe you've wondered or not, but have you ever wondered why you see a movie where you logically know it has a happy ending, and yet during the movie, when their characters struggle, you feel anxious, you feel negative emotions, you feel afraid. The Notebook, you know that Ali and Noah will get together in the end. They will kiss, they will hug, they will be together forever. And yet, while you watch the movie and when you witness their struggle, you're still having these anxiety feelings, right? Why? Because your logical brain may know it has a happy ending, but your emotional and primal brain know the happy ending only when they see it. They feel it when they see it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think I failed the first part of that, but I get this.
Perfect. So the reason this is so important is because I have created this process that I call the decoding grid. So that step number 3, once you have clarity in terms of what's important to you and whether it's essential or optional, is to assess your relationship by using this as a sort of decoding grid, meaning in a visual way. So I take all of the essential values and put them in bold, in a different color versus the optional values. So we create visual contrast between those two set of values. And then we go through each value and I ask the person to assess whether their spouse fulfills that value or not. And we mark it with color coding, with pre-established symbols. So green means yes, it's fulfilled. Green means go. Blue usually is more of a neutral color. Red means stop, right? Attention. And if you add like a check mark with green, it means yes, go. If you put a star with the blue, it means okay, it's more on the positive side. If you put an exclamation mark on the red, it means wow, hold your horses. So the result is that you have a complete picture, an assessment of your entire relationship, a visual assessment that your brain can understand immediately on a logical level, on an emotional level, on a visceral level. All of a sudden, with that picture, you have a look at your essentials and at your deal breakers, and are there any reds there? Oh, maybe my relationship is in trouble. Or is it, no, all the reds are in the optional area and all my greens are in the essential area, but now there are just a couple of reds and I know exactly what to work on to save my relationship. It's very, very powerful because it really aligns your logic with your emotions, with your intuition. You grasp it at a completely different level, and you do all this while considering all the relevant variables of your relationship. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. This is crazy that, yeah, it's...
It sounds obvious when I say it. It's like
it really does, yeah.
Columbus egg, right? And yet, until I stumbled upon it, and it's funny because I discovered the process, I refined it, and when I add that visual component, that's when I knew and I saw the magic happen, right? And but it's when I started like, but why? Why does it work? That's when I stumbled upon all the neuroscience and the research and understanding how our brain works and so on. I kind of, explained it after the fact why my process works so well. And I want to give you 2 examples. So one example of why this is so powerful. So I had a client, and I'll call her Kim. Obviously, none of the names I share are their real names. And she had been married for 25 years. She had been unsure about the marriage right from the get-go, but then life went on. She had kids, they had a marriage, they established a life, they moved to a different country together. And then it happened that 3 years prior to deciding to work with me, she had met another man, and she had been having an affair for 3 years. Now, I didn't judge her. I never judge because people make the best choices they can make at the time they make them. Otherwise, they would make different choices. And she was in the situation where her grown-up son knew about the affair. This other man she had met had divorced his wife and was waiting for her to divorce. And she was terrified of, what do I do now? Do I stay or do I go? Because she wasn't sure. Could I still save my marriage? She obviously cared for her husband, 25 years of life together, right? But she wasn't sure. Can I save my marriage? Am I feeling better with this other man just by contrast because he's maybe just slightly better than my husband? She was completely lost. She was confused. She was having panic attacks. She didn't know what to do, and she came to see me. So I guided her through my process that I call the decoding grid. I applied the steps that I shared with you. And then when it came to visually mapping and doing the assessment, it turned out that she had 26 things that were important to her, and 14 of those were essential. And when she assessed her husband, it turned out that 9 out of 14 essentials were not fulfilled. But that's a logical understanding. In addition to understanding it logically, she saw it, and she saw that all her essential area was in the red zone. There was no more doubting. And she finally realized and was able to put in words all the emotions that she had been feeling all those years. She was able to assess the relationship with her husband on its own merits, completely detached from having met another man. And she just realized that she would never be able to save the relationship with her husband. And that was huge for her. But then the next logical step was, well, what about this other man? Was he a good match or not? And when we assessed this other man, it turned out that he was a green pretty much everywhere. I think he had just one blue and one orange. Everything else was green. And when we put those two decoding grids, these two assessments side by side, she was just blown away. She said, I just got slapped on the face because the truth was staring her in the face. She finally understood, and it was now so obvious to her that the relationship with her husband would not work, that this other man was a perfect fit. She took 1 week to digest that information. After 1 week, she had a heart-to-heart conversation with her husband, and she calmly explained to him, even though previously she had been so fearful of confrontation, that things would not work between them. It wasn't about blaming him. It was just simply not a good fit. And I'm going to make a small parenthesis. The same way that I use this analogy, like if you buy a beautiful pair of shoes and you have size 8, but you buy a pair of shoes that's 7.5, even if it's a beautiful pair of shoes, after a few hours, your feet will hurt. Now, does that mean that it's a bad pair of shoes? No. Does it mean that, my foot is bad? No. It's just not a good fit. It's a beautiful pair of shoes. You have a great foot. It's just not a good fit. So she was able to explain to him that they were not a good fit. He was obviously distraught. He tried to sway her to change her mind, but she already knew, thanks to the decoding grid, that it would be useless to try to save the marriage, that it would only give him false hopes, that it would just be a waste of time, money, emotions. And the day after, she left and she went to stay with this other man. And it may sound so obvious now when I showed her those assessments, and it wasn't me telling her what to do, it was her own truth that came up. But remember, she had been lost and confused for 3 years before she had that level of clarity and certainty. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm just keeping on scrolling here because you're just covering off everything. This is amazing. So I'm just going to look here. I had one of my questions, and I think you've answered it really. Maybe it's obvious. But the difference in the process for a 60-year-old woman who's been married for 30 years with 3 young adult children and a 28-year-old woman who's been married for 5 years and has a toddler. But if it's a process, I was just about to say only a process, and I don't mean that in a diminutive way, but if it is a process, then the rules apply.
Great insight as well. Yeah, the rules apply. And by the way, even though I work predominantly with women, the process applies with men. The process applies with, whether it's a heterosexual couple or a same-sex couple, it doesn't matter. It's a relationship and there are values and the process is the process. Now, sometimes it can be more complicated. You have children, and this is this is what we were talking about earlier in terms of even when you have children, it's maybe even more important to have a clear picture of what your relationship is like so that you really have an understanding of the role model that you're providing to them. But it's the same process. It may take maybe longer in some cases, shorter in some others, but it is the same process. It's like telling me, well, Mike, does it matter how jumbled the cube is or whether this cube has been jumbled for 5 minutes or 5 hours? No. Once you know the algorithm to solve the Rubik cube and you apply it properly, you always get to a solved cube. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think the extension also goes back to your original situation with a business partner,
Yes.
that any situation that's, you've got the scales and it's like, which way do I go? You could pretty much apply this process.
Absolutely. Again, you make so many great comments. In fact, that's one of the things I tell in my book, Divorce Decision Decoded, is that yes, the process you're going to read about in this book is primarily tailored to women and to divorce, but it can be applied to anyone, men or women, and to any decision that is complex, meaning there's a large number of variables, and has a high cost of failure, meaning that if you get it wrong, well, the consequences will be probably long-term and very costly. So that means deciding whether to get in business with a person, deciding whether to quit your job or not, or deciding which job offer to accept, buying a house, even buying a car. I mean, obviously, less variables you'll have, the faster the process will be, but the logic applies. So yes, I mean, I have started by quote unquote tackling divorce because it's one of the most complex 20 to 30 variables and high cost of failure decisions. But I could help people make decisions about should I sell my company or not, or if I'm a CEO and I need to make some strategic decisions, really applying the same process to understanding what are the underlying values that may be driving my decision. How do I get clarity on those, and how do I then distinguish between the hierarchy, the essentials, the optionals? I mean, yes, this process can be applied to so many things. And I had to start somewhere, and I started to where it was closer to home in a way.
And I'm just realizing too all the things that are wrong with that pro and con list,
Yeah.
because without the rating.
And the reality is that the rating is, if you don't have a structured process, you cannot do it by yourself. I mean, usually I ask my clients to subjectively rank their values, and they come up with a ranking, and then I guide them through a step-by-step process, and it takes some time, but we get to the end of it. And then it's like, out of 27 things, only 3 stayed in the same place. Everything changed completely because that's it. The brain cannot process too many variables at the same time. So I have found this system that I talk about in the book to how to tackle complex decision and make sure that you always not only make a ranking, but make sure that it always ends up being the same exact answer every single time. Because if the answer changes, then your conclusion changes, right? So you want to have a solid foundation on which to make your decision because the consequences of getting it wrong is so high.
Okay, so tell us again. I skimmed it right at the beginning. What's the name of your book?
So the book is called Divorce Decision Decoded.
Right.
If people want to get it, they can get it on my website. So if you want to get absolute clarity about any decision, just go to getabsoluteclarity.com. Very simple,
Okay.
3 words, getabsoluteclarity.com. There you'll be able to find the book. You'll also be able to see how I work with my clients, how I could help you if you want to have expert help to be guided through this process. That's the best place. So it's getabsoluteclarity.com.
Okay. Now you also have an online assessment. Uncover the true cost of your indecision on your daily life.
That's right. So as the time of this recording, it's the quote unquote freebie that I offer on my website. It may change in the future, but if you go to my website, you'll see. And what it is a questionnaire that you go through by yourself and you answer questions to really understand and assess the real impact and cost of indecision on your daily life. Because we talked about this at the beginning of the call. I mean, a lot of women that I talk to, they do not have mental clarity anymore. They cannot make plans for the future. They feel stressed. They feel anxiety. So basically, it's a questionnaire and assessment that takes you through all the different life areas. You answer, between 1 and 5, how much do you agree with the statement? 5 means it's absolutely accurate. 1 means it's completely inaccurate. And at the end, you get a score, and you get the explanation of what the score means and what the implications are for you in terms of what your best next steps are.
When I first read it, I thought, that's one of those things that you go like, do I want to do this? But it's so valuable, like to just get, and especially when you have a system, and that sounds like it's trivializing what you do, and I don't mean to do that, but to have that information, it's like eyes come open, blinkers come off.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you look at an iPhone, I mean, it's quote unquote, it's simple to use an iPhone, and yet there's so much knowledge and technology and science behind it, right? And if you go back to the Rubik's Cube, the steps that you can follow may seem simple, right? Just turn the faces of the cube. But you need to know in which sequence you need to turn those faces. It's a simple gesture, but not an easy one necessarily.
after we close, I'm going to sit here and make you solve that Rubik's Cube.
No, in all transparency, I'm not a Rubik Cube solver.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
a decision making expert. One thing that I want to say though is you brought up one important aspect with the comment you just made. Sometimes women are afraid of getting clarity and certainty about their decision because they think that, wow, if I have clarity, it means that I will have to pull the trigger right away and divorce. And it's scary because divorce, as I said, things usually get worse before it gets better. So I want to reassure you and your listeners that it's not the case. When you first have clarity and certainty, knowing really exactly what you want to do and why you want to do it, actually empowers you, gives you also more ability to plan deliberately on the how you want to do it and when you want to do it. There's this analogy that I use. If you want to go on vacation, figuring out what the purpose of your vacation is and where you want to go and what's important to you in your vacation doesn't mean that you need to go and book their tickets right away and leave the day after. No. But if you plan your vacation and know exactly what you want to get out of your vacation beforehand, well, you can plan for it accordingly. Maybe you will book the best hotel or know what to look for. Maybe even learn a few words of the local language so that then when the time comes in maybe 3 months, you will be perfectly prepared to do it. So having clarity and certainty, understanding your what and your why actually empowers you so that you will be more ready to take the leap, if the leap is to leave, with more power when and if you decide that is the right thing. Also, it will enable you to better explain your decision to yourself and others rather than risking, if you stay in this quote indecision, that maybe one day you have a terrible argument with a spouse and some things are said that can never be taken back, and then you end up reacting emotionally, impulsively, and making a decision to go, but then you keep second guessing yourself forever and having that regret. So it's better to know and have that clarity, because once you have that clarity and certainty, whatever decision you make, which, as I said earlier, by the way, can also be identifying that your relationship can be saved and knowing what to focus on to make it happen. But regardless of that, once you have that logical certainty, that emotional peace of mind, that intuitive confirmation, then you know that you can live with your decision for the rest of your life no matter what. And this is true, I don't know if freedom or peace of mind, but it certainly makes a huge difference in your quality of life.
you have done such a really good job. I ask this question in every interview, and I'm going to ask it anyways. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you haven't given us that you think midlife women or a midlife woman, let's stay with divorce,
Mhm.
confused about whether to pull the plug or not, should think about? Because as I say,
I'll,
you've given us so much information.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
I'll give
great.
you one more, because the beauty of the process that I have developed is that in addition to helping you make the right decision, you know, very not always, but it's an often thing that a lot of women are afraid that if they pull the trigger, they think, well, what if the grass is not greener on the other side? It's a legitimate concern. It's like, it may not be ideal with my spouse, but what if, there are no good men out there and it gets worse? And the beauty of this process is that once you go through the process of having that clarity, it creates automatically what I call the blueprint for your perfect, happy, fulfilling relationship. So that you will be able to literally attract the right man in your life. and not repeat the mistakes that you may have made before. But do we have a couple more minutes? Do you want me to share another
Sure.
nugget?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got one more question for you.
Okay. So it's like, have you ever been in the market to buy a new car, and then you kind of set your mind into a specific make and model, and then all of a sudden you see this car everywhere? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes.
Okay. So there's actually a specific reason. It's not that your neighbors are playing a practical joke on you and they all bought a car to play a trick on you. No, there is in the brain a part called the reticulated activated system that is basically the part of your brain that filters information from the environment, because there's always so much information, you cannot take it all in. So you have to kind of say, okay, I'm going to put this in the foreground of my attention. So once you become clear in terms of what you are looking for in a car, you start noticing it everywhere. It was always there in your environment, but you just didn't notice it before because you are not focusing on the things that were matching those specific characteristics. So what I tell women is that once you have this blueprint, you will be able to focus on those things and then start noticing them in your environment in a much easier way, almost as if you were attracting them, right? And I'm not saying it's the law of attraction. I'm not for or against. That's a whole different story. But from a psychological point of view, there's a real scientific reason why you can quote unquote attract things in your life. And also, it becomes a very, very strong and effective tool to be effective in your decision. So let's say that you meet somebody who looks interesting, you go out on a date, and they have a lot of things going on for them. Maybe they have a great sense of humor, and that's something that you value. Maybe they are very successful, and that's something that you value. Maybe they love to travel, that's something that you value, and you're like, oh, giddy, all super happy. But then during the dinner, you realize that they really treat the waiter very badly. And then if you have clarity with your blueprint and know that kindness is one of your values that's essential, it's a red flag. Now, it may appear on the first date or the second date, but what it means is that, you know what, even though there are all these other things, I'm not going to pursue this anymore because I already know beforehand that one of my essentials is missing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. How many times have I said absolutely in this conversation? Okay. One more question. May I ask you a
Yes,
personal question?
yes,
You've lived in 5 different countries and you chose Canada.
yes.
What was that decision? Oh, did you do this? Did you do your process?
Actually, I did. It's very interesting. That's one of the big decisions that I got right and that I acknowledged when I did my life review. I actually took the world map and I said, okay, I'll just pick the place where I want to live. I'll figure the logistics later. And where do I want to live? And actually went through the process of all the things that were important to me in the country that I wanted to live and had it distinguished between the most important to the least important, what was essential versus optional. And Canada ended up being a good candidate. And that's how I came to Canada.
That's great. That just is so simple. I mean, once again, some of these words I use sound like I'm minimalizing what you do, but it just makes so much sense that it's like, why didn't we all think of this? Like, why don't we all just figure out that this is a smart way to do things? Okay, your website link is in the show notes. And oh, now I didn't ask you about social, but I assume because of the intimate nature of what you do with your clients, maybe you're not on social.
I am not very big on social media, just because I feel it's you kind of may risk falling, or I feel I'll take ownership of that. I don't want to feel into this constraint that I have to produce content every day. It feels like slavery to me. I admire people like you who do podcasts on a regular basis. I'd rather do podcasts and share my message on my own time and schedule when it works for me rather than be on social media. So yes, the website is I have a LinkedIn profile, but the best way to reach me is to go on getabsoluteClarity.com and you'll be able to get in touch with me, or look me up on LinkedIn, Mike Fink, divorce, or divorce decision, and you'll find me.
All right. So the website link is in the show notes, and I'll probably put your LinkedIn link in there as well. Listeners, I've just had a conversation with a man who helps women make a decision about divorce. I encourage you to leave comments. Now, I've never said this before, but if you want to use a pseudonym because you're going to ask a question or make a statement, In this particular case, I'm okay with that. And just for people who filled out those forms, the email address never shows on a public page. If you're listening at boomwithabang.com, scroll to the bottom of the page and talk to us there. If there is a burning question I did not ask Mike, ask it in the comments. Or once again, for this podcast only, this episode only, you can use the contact page at Boom with a Bang. Share this episode. Divorce is not uncommon amongst our demographic, but it can be one of those subjects your friends don't want to talk about. They will appreciate knowing there is a tool out there that can help them with the decision. I guess I should rephrase that. There is Mike Fink who can help them with that decision. My usual requests for stars and reviews, they do help us grow. The algorithm goddesses love them. And a reminder that you can support this podcast by buying me a coffee. The link is in the show notes and above Mike's head on his page at our website. And yeah, too bad we're not on video. Mike's pointing above his head. I've also registered at Substack, and following there is free. Mike Fink, thank you so much for being my guest today. And I will apologize for bypassing you that first time. I did the usual women in divorce, a man's telling us. No. So I didn't fill out the priorities of what I needed to do with my guest.
Well, it was a true pleasure being on a guest on your show, Agnes. Really, you made so many insightful comments, and I'm glad I was able to contribute to, helping women, whether I'm a man or not.
Well, and if you bring clarity to just one woman in the audience, I'm very appreciative.
Yeah,
That's great. Have
mission accomplished for sure.
right. Have a great rest of week.
You too. Thanks, Agnes. Bye bye.